Prof. Kamala Naidu, Executive Dean, Faculty of Humanities, our very special person this evening, Professor Kevin Durrheim, who's the inductee, and then online, Prof. John Dixon, Professor of Psychology at the Open University in the United Kingdom, all our guests tonight, our distinguished guests, and all who have joined us also online. Sanmonani, goeienaand, good evening, Tobela. It is my honor to say a few words at this very special event. It's a great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the Professorial Inauguration Lecture of Professor Kevin Durrheim. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to his loved ones, special guests and colleagues. This is indeed a proud moment. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I'm not changing your slides already. This is indeed a proud moment, a proud and joyful moment, and a landmark moment all for you all, for Professor Durrheim and for us here at UJ, for higher education in South Africa and beyond. The inauguration of professors is a public ceremony in which newly appointed professors are inducted into office by the Vice-Chancellor and deliver their inaugural addresses. They are professing at these events. The ceremony has its roots in the medieval university and serves multiple purposes. First, it is an expression of welcome and an entry for new professors joining the circle of colleagues who are already professors. Secondly, it provides a platform for professors to display their expertise in their discipline and to showcase their research. Traditionally, in many universities, assuming the role of the professor refers to the gown and the cap. Once we have listened to the inaugural address tonight, the gown denoting the professorship will formally be assumed. Today we gather to witness Prof. Durrheim's entry into the illustrious community of scholars at our university. It celebrates his contributions to his discipline and ultimately his impact on society. Professors provide the university with its identity, character, academic legitimacy, and integrity. The inaugural lecture is a rite of passage, following the confirmation of the appointment of a person as a professor. This evening, we will listen to Professor Kevin Durrheim as the gown goes to town. By this, we mean that the power of the inaugural address is when the expertise is showcased beyond the corridors of the university and reverberates with society. In the past, many philosophers and scholars have defined universities using narrow conceptualizations. For example, some would say a university is about searching for truth, for universal knowledge, and even nowadays, many times, very instrumental purposes, and also instruments serving the purpose of the economy or being utilitarian in nature. Through our work and research at UJ, we want to break out of these narrow conceptualizations and reflect on the university as contributing to the public good, working towards societal impact. What then is the role of the intellectual? Edward Said, in one of his articles, defined the role of the intellectual as, and we can all listen to it and decide what do we agree with and what not. And Prof. Durrheim, how do you see yourself as an intellectual? He said, it's one who commands a vast knowledge of a specific discipline, one who is rigorous in the analysis of literature, one who views being an intellectual as a vocation, and one who functions as a kind of public memory to recall what is forgotten or ignored, to make the connections that are otherwise hidden, and to provide alternatives for mistaken policies. I actually like them all. I think they are all very applicable. I like particularly also to make the connections that are otherwise hidden. I think that's so important in academia. It remains then for us as a university, anchored in Africa and the global south, to derive our mandate as intellectuals and as professors from what it means to be an intellectual. And importantly, how do we embrace the role of a professor as a disruptor while continuing to be the flagship carrier of our disciplines? This evening, we will listen to Professor Kevin Durrheim as one further step in the journey of being a professor. This journey, which does not conclude tonight once this lecture has been given. In a sense, it's the beginning of a new journey. But notwithstanding, this inaugural lecture does create an opportunity for a self-reflective pause in the journey of the professor. It provides the opportunity that one would never get in your life again to really profess for the first time as a professor. Let me now invite the Executive Dean, Professor Naidu, to introduce Professor Kevin Durrheim. I thank you, Rialeboga, Nyabonga, baie dankie.
Good evening, Prof. Gravett, Prof. Durrheim, guests and colleagues. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Professor Kevin Durrheim now. Kevin Durrheim completed his undergraduate studies through UNISA while he was serving a sentence as a conscientious objector to military conscription. He was the first person in his extended family to obtain a university degree, and he went on to complete his PhD in psychology at the University of Cape Town in 1995 under the supervision of Professor Don Foster. These early days of political transition in South Africa stimulated discussion and research about social psychology amongst a group of UCT staff and students, including his long-standing friends and collaborators, Professors Colin Trudeau and John Dixon. Kevin was interviewed for his first job as a junior research fellow at UCT while hitchhiking from Cape Town to East London. He and his wife of 33 years, Alex, were on their way to get married, and before cell phones, they had to stop along the way at a prearranged place and time for the interview. A very interesting story indeed. In 1996, Kevin joined the psychology department as a lecturer at the then University of Natal in Pietermaritzburg. In addition to his ongoing research on the social psychology of desegregation, he co-edited two widely used research textbooks, Research in Practice, which was published with Martin Terreblanche and Desmond Painter, and Number, Hypotheses and Conclusions with Colin Trudeau. He spent a sabbatical at St. John's College in Cambridge as the Colenso Scholar. In this period, he dived headlong into research on intergroup contact, including ethnographic research on the KwaZulu-Natal beaches, and conducted a series of nationally representative cell phone surveys from his lab in Pietermaritzburg. Kevin quickly ascended the academic ladder, being promoted to professor in 2001. His ongoing work on intergroup relations, social change, and racism led to the publication of the award-winning 2011 book, Race Trouble, Race, Identity, and Inequality in Post-Apartheid South Africa, with Xoliswa Mtosi and Lindsay Brown. More recently, he shifted his sights to racism within the discipline of psychology and the role that psychology plays in defending systemic inequality. Together with colleagues Mike Quayle and Larry Took, Kevin designed and built VIAPPL, a virtual environment for conducting experiments in social interaction. In both this work and his work on racism, Kevin Durrheim has been building a model of the person founded in social relations and interactions. He continues to work with Professor Quayle, Dr. Kevin Igwe, and his current students and collaborators in studying interactions, and more recently, developing machine learning applications to represent and intervene in social life. Kevin is grateful for the support he's received from funders, including most notably the NRF. He also owes a debt of gratitude to the students he has worked with over the decades, including 50 master's students and 21 PhDs. That's wonderful, Kevin. Many of these are now professors and senior leaders at universities in South Africa and around the world. Professor Durrheim has published over 120 journal articles, 50 book chapters, and 8 books, which have received more than 21,000 citations. He has received numerous grants and awards in recognition of his work, including in 2018, the Nevette Sanford Award from the International Society for Political Psychology. In 2020, he received an A2 rating from the NRF. I'm very biased towards sociology. Kevin joined the University of Johannesburg as distinguished professor in June 2022. Instead of studying social change, he came to UJ to create it. He has been working hard to build the UJ Methods Lab, which will help to open African access to open science and to future opportunities for collaboration, training, and innovation. So we are extremely thrilled and excited to have Professor Durrheim in our faculty and at UJ, and we now call upon Kevin to address us. So I thank you, Kielebocha and Giabonga, baie dankie.
Thank you all for coming. I must say it's been, I thought there'd be no one here. You know, you have those nightmares because I'm not from Johannesburg, and to see you all here, and some of you have even flown in, and I know there's lots of friends online. It really gives you a sense of being in a community, and it makes you feel warm, and I don't know even how to express the appreciation that I feel. Family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, students, and representatives of all those categories together. So thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about my work, obviously just some snapshots of it, focusing on social change. Later on, I'm going to start engaging with the debate around decolonization and psychology and decolonization. And then I thought it was a good idea to like the how to fix it part of my title. And, you know, as I was writing the talk, I thought, no, that wasn't such a good idea, but I'll do some proposals about how to fix it. And a special thanks, I almost forgot, is to Professor Barnes and Professor Naidu, because they brought me here and really have breathed a new breath of life into me and my work. So thank you both for that. So first, what is social psychology? This is a town and gown event, so not everyone might know what social psychology is. This quote captures it. The quote is attributed to Descartes, to John Searle, to Talmudic scholars, and to many others. So it's one of these bits of public knowledge. We do not describe the world we see the world we can describe. And I put it here in our local terms, our perceptions have been captured. They're already structured. And the way in which I do that, I've shown this picture to students, generations of students, young African students, and asked them, who's in the picture? And you know what they say every time? They say it's Christ. And for me, that's absolutely amazing, because you've got a few strokes of ink from another generation, another continent, and you show this to young people, and they see Christ. It's captured. And so there's what social psychology, we study that process of capture. Apartheid was a form of capture, an ideological capture in that sense. A capture both of perception, but also a capture of world. And there's interesting play here between how our perceptions and our thoughts are captured and how the world is captured. So this is an infamous quote from Verwoerd. I think we all know it. It's about education, 1954, debating the Ubuntu Education Act in Parliament. He says, natives are hewers of wood and drawers of water. There's no space for the native above certain forms of labor. Racist capture, a way of seeing the world. Of course, apartheid wasn't only a count of racism in people's minds that psychologists are interested in. It's also racism in practice. So on the basis of this view, the apartheid world was constructed of segregation, segregated neighborhoods, segregated schooling, grand apartheid, petty apartheid, beaches being segregated, park benches being segregated. So the actual world, our social world, becomes captured. But the perception itself is captured. When you think of the term native, the word itself might think autochthony or authenticity. But as Mamdani points out, this very concept of native is a creation of the colonial state. Colonized, the native is pinned down, localized, thrown out of civilization as an outcast, confirmed to custom, and then defined as its product. So the very terms of reference are captured. So how do we uncapture it? How do we produce social change? As psychologists, change both in worlds and in minds. And this is why living in South Africa and working in South Africa for the past 30 years has been absolutely fascinating, because it's an experiment in transformation, in uncapturing, in change. And it's an interesting experiment because it's an experiment driven by a black majority government of former liberation activists, whose interests are to create a better new world. And these are the three principal legs that were used in this process of change. Truth in Reconciliation, the Commission, especially to deal with historical trauma. Desegregation, repealing apartheid legislation, the whole legal infrastructure of apartheid. And then, of course, economic change, broad-based black economic empowerment. So, massive social change program. Its focus on desegregation. That's the core of it. And so that's really what we've been studying. You might have read James Gibson's work on the Truth and Reconciliation. He argues, and he's got a very positive view of this change, that this is an exogenous force. You need the strong, powerful outside force that would make ordinary people rethink their views about their contentious past and hence create change. Social psychologists have been very interested in desegregation as an instrument to create change. I've got a quote here from Kenneth Clark, one of the instrumental leaders in this early work. Under certain circumstances, desegregation not only proceeds without major difficulties, but has been observed to lead to the emergence of more favorable attitudes and friendlier relations between races. The context of this work was the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case in the United States around desegregating, getting rid of Jim Crow racism, desegregating education in the United States. And what the Supreme Court, they reached the conclusion that segregation is illegal. It violates the Constitution. But they asked, is it possible to desegregate without social collapse? Can we segregate peacefully? And that's where the social psychologists came in. And they developed this theory called social contact, the contact hypothesis or intergroup contact theory. This has been one of the most successful branches of work in social psychology around, and it's focused on social change. So the psychology of change is focused on desegregating, bringing people together, creating intergroup contact under optimal conditions. I did a Google Scholar search last night, and I'm putting these terms, intergroup contact theory. 17,400 hits since 2023. you can see this theory has been successful. It's one of the great success theories in social psychology. But how did it work in South Africa? How's desegregation and contact unfolded? Well, the first thing that we found, and this is early work, that 1999, we were on the beaches. The beaches were desegregated in 94. And so we went onto these newly desegregated. So I did this work with John Dixon. You'll listen to him a little later. We went and observed how people were using these desegregated beaches. And we found in when they arrived, who they came with, where they sat, when they left, they used the beaches in such a way to maximize segregation again. So they desegregated, so we use the space to increase segregation and separateness. And this has not only happened on the beaches, it has happened everywhere. Richard Ballard's written a lot, he's in our audience over here, has written a lot about, he coined the term semigration. People are moving, you're not emigrating, you're semigrating to other little places where you can be with like-minded folks, maybe in this gated community or at Paternoster. The second thing that we found is that at sites of contact, like this, we did a survey in Northdale, it's an Indian community outside Pietermaritzburg. Informal settlement was established there in the middle of Northdale. So we do a survey, and the closer people are, the more contact they have, the closer they are to the informal settlement, not the better attitudes they have, not the friendly relations they have, but quite the opposite. The greater sense of threat they feel. The desire to avoid contact. I don't want to see them at all. Fortification. A low-grade war was basically broken out between the formal residents and the informal residents of the community around competition for electricity, for example. They were like hot wiring the power, and then there were power outages, and there was conflict. So what this contact theory doesn't understand in terms of historically divided societies is that these the material relations, the histories of inequality, the histories of those relations between groups tend to get into the way of this view that contact will be able to patch up and create the type of social change that we're after. The historical context, of course, for these attitudes, this goes back to I.D. McCrone's work, 1937. He says, in the atmosphere of war, this is where race attitudes were developed. He said they were developed on the frontier. He develops this hypothesis called the frontier hypothesis. Where do our race attitudes come from in South Africa? Well, they come from that history. They come from the history of dispossession. They come from the history of violence. In the context of war, race attitudes assume extreme, exaggerated forms of expression. Contact hypothesis doesn't often take deep histories and deep inequalities of historically divided societies into account. That's why a study in South Africa has been so interesting, as opposed to studies in the lab or in surveys, cross-sectional surveys. So have race attitudes changed? Has these extreme attitudes, intergroup attitudes, changed? Well, they have a little, but not much. We did a survey of this, so there's been this historical tradition over almost 100 years of attitude measurement in South Africa. And this is just one plot that we've got here. White Afrikaans speakers, you can see, if you look at 2008, the French-Lescue study, you can see there's quite a high social distance against Africans. And it's very similar throughout the years, going back to 1934. And this over here is a social distance. A social distance scale essentially means, would you be happy having people of this other group in your country? Most people say yes, I don't mind them in my country. Would you like to have them in your city? Oh, that's okay, yeah. Would you like to have them in your neighborhood? On your street? As your next door neighbors? In your family by marriage? So you can see why it's called a social distance scale. Now, what we find is that they call the principal implementation gap. Yes, the idea, it's fine to have people over there in the country somewhere. It's fine to have desegregated schools, but the closer to home you get, you find more opposition to integration, to these friendly attitudes that we hope to promote. But of course, it's not all doom and gloom. Contact also has positive effects. And this is a study that we did from this is before all these telephone surveys. Now you get phoned all the time by these marketing companies. We did the study before, I think it was 2008. We set up a little makeshift survey unit in our lab, and we did a random telephone calling on South Africans' cell phones. This is our black sample, our African sample. And if you take a look there, the quality of contact, in other words, the better quality contact you have with white folks. Yes, it does. Look at the bottom there, racial attitudes. You've got less prejudice. They're not so bad. You have a less sense of personal, I'm discriminated against. The more contact you have, you feel like, I'm not discriminated against. And right at the end, you have, it erodes a sense that we as a group, black people, are discriminated against. Everything's okay. So what this has become known as a sedative effect, because not most of the work on contact had looked at majority groups. So this work over here has shown that minority groups, the effects on contact, is even see oppression anymore. Here's an example from some of the work that we've done with domestic workers, because often the relations between domestic workers and their employers is very friendly. It's intimate. They love each other. Not in all cases. I mean, there's been some cases of extreme dehumanization that we've also looked at. But here's just a quote, one little extract from an employer. I don't want to exploit her, I really don't want to. And some of the accounts of those employers that we interviewed are incredible. I remember one, she's given up part of her pension to buy a house for her worker. What do the workers say? This is just one little snapshot. I take them as my brother and sister. They help me with the children. They pay for my children at school. They don't ask me anything. I must help them as they help me. So we spoke in this paper over here about system justification, how intergroup contact and these kind of friendly relations can help to secure unequal social systems. Interestingly, I just put this slide in. This is a paper I read recently. What these folks did, this in the United States, they took over 5,000 publicly traded companies in the United States, and you can see the one plot over there, the one that's going up, that they did a language model, basically sort of computer reading of all their annual reports, all the official documentation they had to produce. And they looked for tokens about DEIs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All stuff about affirmative action, and we're having these diversity programs. And of course, those 17,000 papers in contact theory, a lot of this now is focused on diversity and promoting diversity in organizations. So there's this huge growth in this diversity industry. But you look at the other graph. The other graph is actual diversity in employment. Very little. So we can see once again how intergroup contact and this whole focus on diversity, let us get together, let's get rid of the prejudices, is part of our contemporary ideology that's keeping these very unequal systems functioning. Okay, so here's a part to step back. So what's happened? Take stock. Du Bois' 1903 famous book, The Souls of Black Folks, said that the problem of the 20th century is a problem of the color line. So that's what we've spoken about, the segregation, Jim Crow racism in the United States. And it really has been it was the problem of the 20th century. If you think of the civil rights movement, you think of desegregation and decolonization in Africa. I suppose the end of apartheid in 1994 was the last bastion of that color line disappearing, being eradicated by removing the apartheid legislation. But of course, the problem hasn't gone away. So there has been desegregation has worked to solve some problems. It has addressed the color line. But what Ndlovu Gacheni, in his really interesting book, Epistemic Freedom in Africa, he says that the problem of the 21st century is the epistemic line. And the epistemic line is the division around who's qualified to speak, who's qualified to know, It's essentially a division around these old race stereotypes reworking themselves into the current world, creating new fissures and lines of division. And we'll take a little look now at how this epistemic line works. I didn't have space over here to put a title, but if I had, I would have called this the crucifixion of Eusebius Makaza. So this comes from, and I put it over here. The fees must fall. It's in the context of 2015. Fallism is a very important moment in history, not only in South African history, but I think in terms of decolonization, sort of a global history. It's a critical here. And we can see this epistemic line. Who's qualified to speak and who's qualified to say what? It doesn't go. It's reanimated. So the Wit students over there said, F white people who remain the beneficiaries. There's the epistemic line. That's the division. Makaza says, he writes over there, frankly, I laugh at the naivety of people who think that the more anti-white they sound, the more black consciousness real deal they are. And so here's the epistemic line reworking itself again. It says, it's deeply troubling to be told as a black person you're some kind of house Negro trained to manage field Negro speaking out of turn. It hurts. The epistemic line reworking itself into the new context. But it's not only there. This is, Prof. Naidu mentioned a little bit about the machine learning model. So we developed this method. We create word embeddings and we basically measure with these word embeddings. They're very clever. They read vast quantities of words. It's the technology behind ChatGPT, and it's a text recognition task. So they learn to recognize where words go in sentences and become very good at it. And then they represent these words in a mathematical model. And these mathematical models are with extreme precision. If you've worked with ChatGPT, you can see they're quite uncanny in how much they know. And so what we've done over here is we take, this is speakers' quotes from the media. There were 3,000 land quotes, people speaking about land, and this is like politicians mainly. And then we put the speaker's name and the quote that they have. And so basically when we train our word embedding model, it estimates how similar or how different speakers are by the language they use. So we develop a way of representing an ideological space or people's opinions within an ideological space and people's positioning within it. And you can see this epistemic line there. If you take a look at the bottom, you'll see the blue dots there. Those are DA speakers, and you can see some of the things they're concerned about: law enforcement, service delivery, land grabs, illegal occupation, human settlement. So they've got a whole set of concerns, the concerns of landowners. There on the top red, we've got EFF. And what are they concerned about? White supremacy, the apartheid regime, the rightful owners, rubber bullets, their concerns. The poor. So you can see how this racialized distribution of opinion. Of course, I forgot about the ANC, the green dots. There they are, factions of the ANC. Some of them with the blue dots, some of them with the red dots. The color line, that epistemic line, is animating this debate on race. The same thing, we did a much more complex one, downloading tweets. This over here was with just before the riots in KwaZulu-Natal in 2021. And we looked for tweets on Zuma. And the red tweets at the bottom, we can see that there's sort of white folks. We got that from code switching, so it's English and Afrikaans. And then African speakers, African languages are intermixed with English in the main body of the blue ones are the media. They always have this sort of very objective register of speech. They're always separated from everyone else. But you can see once again, the biggest division isn't between those who support and oppose Zuma. The biggest division is along race lines in terms of this ideological space. So that epistemic line is so built in and ingrained into every feature of our society. But it's not only in ideology It's not only in language, in people's opinions, in their position in debates. It's a matter of land. The epistemic line is baked into the very fabric of society. It's baked into our world. And a good place to look at that is the universities. It's in the structure of the universities. And I want to take a look at UCT here, and a little bit of the architecture. We've got some interesting architecture over here, the kind of brutalism of the campus that we're at. But look at the majesty of UCT by contrast. But you see, in South African universities, there was a colour line. These were racially exclusive spaces. And so there's been massive victories and gains. I mean, it's one of the greatest joys is being an academic during this period that we have and actually seeing the transformation that's happened in the universities. Literally, that colour line has gone. It has its history. But the epistemic line, this qualification to speak, this racialized qualification to speak is still deeply ingrained. Take a look. This is a quote from the committee that was deciding on the buildings at UCT. And this is a quote from them. The God-given site at Kruterskeer called for an artist. And so they appointed Solomon, he was the architect, and he had to go around the University of Great Britain, Western Europe, North America in search of ideas and information. So what should inspire this architecture? Of course, the site wasn't God-given. It was given by Cecil John Rhodes. We won't ask how he got it, but he gave it. But in his idea, in his mind, was a great place to put a university above the city, looking down on the people. It's a perfect place to put a university. It was a God-given site for him, this positioning. And of course, the architecture, those halls, the wood inlay, the columns, all there's those classical features. What is it? It breathes and embodies Eurocentrism, doesn't it? And it encourages the adoption of a particular view of self. You come down from there to here to learn. So this epistemic line, it's built into the fabric of not only a university, but our whole society. It's built in. It's not only the buildings. Much more important is actually what's being taught inside there. Those buildings. And here's when I want to sort of have some reflections on psychology, my own discipline. Now, the concern about decolonization and this concern about the epistemic line, it's global. It's not only here in South Africa that there's these calls to decolonize the curriculum. It's a global. So African American scholars are writing about the same concerns, and they engage. Am I in the right place here? Yes. They have got three criticisms. Epistemic, there we are, the word epistemic: exclusion on the basis of race. You've got no authority, no voice, you can't speak. White centering. A very interesting concept. Why? What is white centering in psychology? Well, you build a science of psychology. White people build it, mainly white men build the science of psychology. It's about human nature. It's about all of us, about human nature. It's our psychology. It's the basic principle of psychology by studying white students. And that's basically what psychology, how it worked. You studied university students in the United States mainly, and a little bit in Europe by a particular cohort of people. And then that knowledge that you get is this universal knowledge. Now this over here is a crisis. It's scandalous. I think you would agree with that. It's scandalous. And the scandal broke in 2010 with this paper by Henrich et al. I think it was called, the paper was entitled "The Weirdest People in the World." And what was weird? Weird was Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So it was a bit ironic use of the word weird, because these were the normal folks, actually. These weren't the weird folks. These were the normal folks that there in America that they were just studying. They were giving out their questionnaires, they were putting them in the experiments. It's the white kids at university, privileged. And so they said, oh, well, the science is now based on this very small cohort of people that look just like us. We must do something about it. And what's the answer? What do? Intergroup contact. Partnerships. That's what we want. We want to have contact. We want to have partnerships now. With who? With non-weird institutions. That's us, folks. You know, it's interesting who's non-weird. It's just, you just throw everything. I wrote one paper, called it Frankensteins of American Psychology, because this is a Frankenstein. It's like everyone else that's not us patched together into one thing. Yeah, we are non-weird. They made me change the title. So that what they want to do is they want to diversify the empirical base. Sounds so nice, doesn't it, eh? They want to diversify to make a more complete understanding of human nature. But of course, whose theories is it? Whose human nature is it? Who's getting the funding? Who's driving the product? And now all of a sudden we sort of, once again, this kind of extractive colonialism, and we're going to go and get information from all these non-weird folks. We're going to put it in there, and it's going to be a better psychology. So you can see this epistemic line is not baked into the buildings only, but I'm just taking one snapshot of one discipline. You can see right inside the discipline itself is a crisis. And now a response to crisis, which draws intergroup contact to try and keep this unequal system still together, as opposed to actually fundamentally changing the way we do and think about our discipline. 2015. Ooh, I'm running out of time. 2015 is an important year. It's the year that the fallism broke out, because it's like sort of the end of, we were captured by the Rainbow Nation idea. It was a lovely idea. And for some reason, for many years, it actually worked. It captured us quite convincingly, because there was change. We could see changing in the student compositions. There was employment. There was a growing black middle class. There was change. But by 2015, the students, and I think everyone else, realized that it was false. It couldn't work. And these are the problems, summarized beautifully by Sabelo and Ndlovagacheni. Socioeconomic inequality, we've got them all around us. We can just see them: joblessness, access to higher education, who has it, economic wealth distribution, inequalities, throughput and retention of students, who doesn't make it through the university. You know, who doesn't come out the other side? Irrelevance of what's taught to getting a job. There's a concern. And of course, issues of worker demands and just general inequalities. So our society is like sort of still deeply unequal, and this legacy of colonialism and apartheid obviously is, as I said early on, is baked in, continues to be baked in. Interestingly, that's why I think 2015 is an important year. I just did an Ngrams, a Google Ngrams trajectory. I just put in 3 words, and you can just see, like, since 2015, this I think goes to 2019, this massive increase in concern about desegregation, the decolonial, decolonize. It's not only in South Africa; it's a global thing. It's the new ideology to keep. It's the last gasp of the dying horse, is one way of thinking about it. This notion that we're going to patch it together by using intergroup contact, DEI interventions, now getting non-weird people into our studies, still keep the inequality together, but now create this huge discourse and these programs and interventions. And okay, so I wanted to plow into, I've got, I think, 10 minutes left. I want to plow into decolonial discourse. And what is the issue of, I think that if you come up in 2024 as a professor in South Africa, you have to address decolonization. So from my reading of this literature, it's against intergroup contact. And it's against intergroup contact for 2 reasons. Firstly, because of the history of intergroup contact, and I think that if I just summarize it, and this, I mean, it'd be interesting to discuss it, I think that the big problem is the one of theft. I think that's how, I mean, putting it very simply in a word there, but I think it's theft of what they call extractive. Colonialism was extractive. And it's obviously the theft of people in terms of slavery. It's the theft of resources. It's the theft of land. It's the theft of artifacts, which we now want to return. But importantly for us in psychology, it's the theft of history and the theft of personhood. And those are things that are hard to get back. You can't actually restore the artifacts. You can't get the artifacts back, because they'll always come back as something that was different than they left. Mbembe actually says we shouldn't get them back. It's too low a price for the people that took them to pay just to give them back to us. But that's another story. But how does theft of personhood and theft of history work? Well, it works through this opposition between civilization and savagery. Savagery has no history. All history is this universal history. It's the history of civilization. And then as soon as you have a kind of assimilative understanding of personhood, like you work yourself up the ranks of civilization, you get co-opted into a framework by which you lose personhood. So, and just as we can't just restore those artifacts, we can't just restore personhood and history. It's somehow difficult. So that is one of the reasons why a decolonial discourse is against contact, because of the history of contact and what it's done in Africa. The second is what Mbembe argues, that decolonial discourse is an identity project. It's a project of finding authenticity or finding voice in the ruins or rubble of colonialism, in the aftermath, once it's been taken away. How do you sort of find some voice? And he says there's two basic identity narratives here. There's one of nativism, where you go back to a pre-colonial past and you find your true essence over there, and then you start speaking from there. And the other is Afro-radicalism, which is a Marxist register of sort of, having nothing to do with them, revolution, break it down, etc. And the third, so those are the two reasons why decolonial discourse is against intergroup contact. And the third feature, I think that, I don't know if this is true, it's just my own reading of it, I think the proposals for change, I've read a lot of these folks, the proposals for change, I'll just characterize them as weak. I don't know if that's a good characterization, because they involve some kind of compromise. So what do? How do you change it? Do you break down all the buildings? Do you burn all the libraries? Is that what change is? Is that what or where do you draw the line? What kind of compromise are you going to have now? So there tend to be these sort of weak proposals. And I'm going to show you how this is, I think, a very important book in South African psychology, Kapana Rotele's book, The World Looks Like This From Here. Title's great, and I'll talk a little bit about that title later. But you can see Rotele's book is, and his thinking, it follows this characteristic. So it is decolonize the mind is the objective. It's theft. Our minds have been stolen. We need to retrieve it. We need to get it back so we can create our own psychology. And what's the starting point for this? The starting point is African ways of seeing, hearing, listening, speaking, ultimately language. So there's kind of nativism. We must go find our ways of seeing. And then the third thing he says, we want to create an African psychology. We're going to get rid of that psychology. Actually, in one part of the book, because I come from UKZN, so I was a bit hurt by this. He sort of mocks UKZN for having African psychology and other psychology together. You think, oh, look at these guys. They're like sort of, real sellouts. But we've got to cut off properly. We've got to do a proper job here. So there's a kind of Afro-radicalism. So we see that structure of his work. But of course, at the end of the day, I think there's a weak proposal for change, because why is it an African psychology? So he's still drawing this notion of psychology. He's still drawing a notion of Africa. So I think that the proposals for change are weak. That's contentious. So here's my, I think one way I've recently read a lot of Akil or Ashil, I don't know how to pronounce his first name, Mbembe. His work on Afropolitanism is inspiring. And I think it helps us think of a different way of thinking about intergroup contact and the future. So this is the how to fix it part, and I hope I've got enough time to do this. I do, I've got 5 minutes. So the first thing he says that Africa is no longer, he says, look, Afropolitanism is a cultural, historical, and aesthetic sensibility. And where's the sensibility come from? It comes from the idea that Africa no longer constitutes a center in itself. And why doesn't it constitute a center in itself? There's two reasons why. The first reason is because of migration. So he says we can't go look into Africa and find our true self there, our core there. He says it's gone. Colonization changed it. And the two things is, the one is migration, because, of course, the history of slavery, but also colonization itself, and then sort of post-colonial migration. So we've got Africa is migration. And so there's these connections with everywhere. And that's what he says in that first quote over there, the awareness of the imbrication of the here and elsewhere. A manner of embracing with full knowledge of the facts. It's not naive to inequalities, but embracing with full knowledge of the facts, the foreign, the foreigner, and the far off. So that's his first proposal. There is no, what is Africa? Who is Africa? Where is Africa? The diaspora. The second thing he says, and I found this is, when I first read it, I was like, wow, this is quite interesting. He said, what he describes as a spectacular return to animism. And no longer worship of ancestors, but based on cult of self and of objects. Isn't that so interesting? A return to animism. Not only in Africa, in the whole world. Sort of the African model sort of now takes over the world. And what is this? The cult of self. The cult of self, and he talks about modern technologies and cell phones and the making of the self and the flexibility in which selves can be made and projected and remade. So we, just the same as we could conjure up ancestors at one time, now we can conjure up selves. And so going to the past to look for some authentic self to start a project of an African psychology or of a politics, he says, is possibly misguided. I think that's my reading of him. So here we are taking stock. There's a take stock slide. So this is about, can we change the way our perceptions have been captured? That's what this talk has been about, the social psychology. Can we change it? So contact theory says, yes, we can. We can just put them together in the same pot, mix it up over there, and it's going to be all great. These friendly relations are going to come about. I think our work in South Africa and many others have shown that in these deeply divided historical societies, it's not a straightforward practical plan for moving forward. Of course, decolonial discourse rejects those solutions as compromises. And I think for very good reason. And then we've got, I said that reconfigures and possibly rehabilitates this notion of contact, but in a reworked way, Afropolitanism. It's the imbrication, it's bringing people together, it's bringing diversity together. It's not looking within, it's not looking within to the center, it's looking without. And it's looking to the future, not looking to the past. So that's what he's arguing. Bring different points of view together and we can produce new forms of identity. So it's a forward-looking version of contact. It's actually a theory of self over here, an animist theory of self that goes beyond this kind of sovereign self of psychologists. So there's a project here for contact theory. There's a project here for psychologists. So where do we find ourselves? I provocatively have said we find ourselves in the rubble of colonialism. We do. The world might look okay, but I think that the fees must fall in fallism. It hasn't. It's not over. It's quiet now, but it's not over. These contradictions haven't gone away. So this is where we are. We're in this, and this is the sign of it is like this increasing discourse of decolonization. That's the sign of just how desperate things are. So what is the way forward? And I think my starting point is what Kapana Rotele said about in the title of his book, What the World Looks Like From Here. I think that's a great starting point to move forward. What does the world look like from here? But of course, it's not an individualistic thing. So in Rotele's book, he's looking at the world as his view of the world. But if we take Mbembe into account, we've got lots of different perceptions of the world, what the world looks like from lots of different people that are differently from here and elsewhere, and we want to put them together into some form of ritualistic engagement through which we can conjure up new selves. And so this is the project, just my last two slides. This is the project that I've come here to work on. This thing's called the UJ Methods Lab. So our slogan is Open Science Portal in Africa and for Africa. So it's Open Science has got this myriad of resources for judging what the world looks like. So we can't go back to like sort of what is an authentic African perception to say what the world looks like from here, but we've got a whole set of techniques, technologies, languages that we can use to take a look at what the world looks like. And so this over here is the Methods Lab. It's first and foremost a network of just starting maybe with PhD students, with postgraduate students, with researchers whoever in the diaspora in refugee camps, in prison, doesn't matter. So we want to create a network of people who are interested in saying what the world looks like from here. And we want to host events that inspire them. Like, wow, look, I can use this tool to like tell what the world looks like from here. And then we want to put them want to skill them up. Create micro-credential, course of micro-credentials, and give those micro-credentials to other universities to pull their students into this network. And we want to engage each other, what the world looks like from here, and see if we can create new forms of personhood and new ideas about how to move forward. And I think it captures the spirit of Afropolitanism, this forward-looking way of engaging the other and the diverse. And I've made it 2 minutes late, but thank you so much for attending.
Hi, everybody. I assume I'm audible. Honored guests, colleagues, and especially Professor Kevin Durrheim. It's an honor to act as respondent to this inaugural lecture. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you guys personally in lovely South Africa, and not only because it would allow me to escape the very miserable weather that you're going to hear probably howling outside my study window. This is what we in the UK call spring. Anyway, I've only been given around 10 minutes to formulate a response, so I'll have time to pick out just 1 or 2 points from Professor Durrheim's much richer argument. He begins by highlighting the fact that we see the world not as it is, but only through the symbolic resources that our culture, political perspectives, and of course language makes available to us. Our knowledge of the world in this sense is already captured knowledge, and I think a great strength of Professor Durrheim's work over the years has been to demonstrate the consequences of this capturing of our knowledge at the level of everyday life. In fact, in one of his early papers, he spoke about trying to do this by looking at how attitudes pervade the very fiber of everyday life. It shapes, for example, where and with whom we sit on a supposedly desegregated beach, a multiracial beach, how we react to the movement of new neighbours into our residential areas, or whether or not we support particular initiatives to address historical inequalities. I think the problem with captured knowledge for me is that we're often ourselves unaware of the sheer extent to which it affects how we think and feel and act. We can see it in other people, of course, but we tend to think that our visions, although not other people's, of the social world, are accurate reflections of the properties of that world, of how things really are. And sometimes I think it takes a jolt to get us out of that space of complacency. When I first immigrated to South Africa from Northern Ireland at the age of 15, for example, I was completely unaware of the extent to which my family and I saw the world in sectarian terms and organized so much of our everyday thinking around the binary categories of Protestant versus Catholic. I remember coming home from my first day at school and saying to my Mom, I don't understand what's going on. Nobody in my school has asked me about my religion. I was used to living in an environment where if there's any doubt at all about what group I belonged to, Catholic or Protestant, that would have been the very first thing people would have found out about me. And we Northern Irish have very cunning ways and means of figuring these things out, be warned. Indeed, for hundreds of years, we've mistreated one another, discriminated against one another, and even murdered one another on the basis of what seem to many parts of the rest of the world incredibly arbitrary religious categories. In the case of Northern Ireland, these are categories were given significance, they were given historical importance through the dynamics of colonization. This bequeathed to us our sectarian version of captured knowledge, and we are still in Northern Ireland living in the rubble of what Kevin calls the rubble of colonialism. Just as in South Africa, racialized ways of viewing the world have become so deeply entrenched by the same kinds of dynamics. But what are we meant to do? In psychology, we've tended to answer this question by reaching for very well-intentioned interventions to reduce prejudice. If only we can think nicer thoughts and abandon our false stereotypes of others, if only we can have kind of feelings towards them, then wider forms of discrimination will surely gradually disappear. As a boy, I participated in one such intervention. I can vaguely recall it was called something like Friendship Across the Barricades, and it brought together pupils from my school, which is a Protestant school, with pupils from a Catholic school, in the hope that somehow this experience might erode the sectarian foundations of our society. My own work, which built very heavily on the earlier work conducted by Professor Durrheim and his colleagues on places like beaches and bars and so forth in everyday spaces. We've been looking at how residents now use everyday spaces in the city of Belfast, our capital city in Northern Ireland. And what we've discovered is continued ongoing stark levels of segregation expressed by the most in and through the most mundane activities in everyday life. Sectarianism penetrates the routes people take to work, where they queue for the bus, where they walk their dogs or take exercise, where they feel safe and unsafe, where they feel they belong and alienated. Northern Ireland, like South Africa, remains in the thrall of captured ways of seeing the world. And I think decades of peace building, diversity training, and prejudice reduction have left these deeper lying structures intact. I think a large part of Professor Durrheim's career has been devoted to exposing the limits of this prejudice reduction of model of change. His work has shown, for example, that attempts to establish more positive racial attitudes among whites may well reduce racial stereotypes. It may well promote positive emotions like empathy. However, it will leave largely intact the deeper forms of captured knowledge through which colonial power, privilege, and division continue to operate. It also leaves foundational structures such as segregation relatively intact. To break free of the limits of mainstream psychology, and indeed of some versions of the decolonial project, Professor Durrheim advocates a new post-colonial way of thinking and investigating contact and social change. And here he builds particularly on the recent writings of Mbebwe and Kapana Ratale. He argues it's not enough to criticize Western psychological concepts and forms of inquiry, and it's not enough to highlight the flawed model of social change in which well-meaning psychologists have sought to promote prejudice reduction, including the contact hypothesis. Instead, and I'm going to quote now from his written address, we need to rupture captured ways of seeing by employing tools and lenses for seeing, new tools and lenses for seeing. And we need to recognize that by bringing multiple tools and perspectives into play, we may develop a joint view of the world in rubble from which to gain our bearings, rediscover ourselves, and build a new future together. In many ways, I find this the most interesting bit of Professor Durrheim's written paper, and no one could deny it's very elegantly phrased. It's also where rather ambitiously he tries to fix things, which is always a difficult thing to do. I also find it the most enigmatic part of his argument. And I find myself wanting to be given a bit more detail on what these new tools and perspectives might look like, about how in practice they might help us move out of the rubble of colonialism and its captured ways of seeing. There are good reasons for this, of course. Professor Durrheim's inaugural lecture represents just the beginning of his new project at the University of Johannesburg, and the substance of that project is still very excitingly a work in progress. I think that's what he means when he says in his narrative CV that the move to your university has in many ways bequeathed a new lease of life into his career. To use a metaphor, when reading his paper and listening to him speak, it felt like Professor Durrheim is like a man who for about 30 years has been sawing the branch of mainstream psychology in which he himself has been very uncomfortably perched. And now he's finally made it all the way through. The branch has fallen, and so has he, but into the loving arms of the University of Johannesburg. A new beginning for a new kind of psychology. And I've no doubt that Professor Durrheim will make this collaboration the next success story, an already long and distinguished career. So in conclusion, I'm going to break with formality. I like to be formal about these things, but I would now like to address Kevin, Professor Durrheim, personally as a friend for over 30 years, as well as a colleague. Kevin, I must admit, when I was asked by your university to give this response, my first thought was an inaugural lecture at our age, but really. Certainly, I feel a lot closer these days to being to kind of giving a valedictory address rather than an inaugural address. But having read and listened to your lecture, my cynicism and world weariness has been dispelled, and I'm excited to think about how your work's going to develop over the coming decade. I think more important, I hope we'll be able to discuss these things in person soon, but preferably over a nice glass or two of South African wine. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and do send my love from the UK to Alex and Shea. Thank you.
So now you can join us. We are going to robe you so that the gown can go to town. I never know what I will look to. There you are. It is big.
Oh, I'm a professor.
Okay, I'm just going to say a few words. Okay. So, just a few words. Firstly, I met Kevin briefly for the first time outside with his robe and his hat. Didn't look at him properly, sorry, Kevin. Said, pleased to meet you. And when he came in, I saw this guy who looked faintly familiar, but without the gown and the hat, I again introduced myself. So now you look particularly familiar, Kevin. A warm word of congratulations with this inaugural address. You know, I was told by Prof. Naidu about this professor and the UJ Methods Lab. And I listened to her and I thought, sounds interesting. But after tonight, I realized why she was so excited about this work. And I'm now equally excited about this work that you are going to take forward and the impact that this will have. And really, really looking forward to follow the trajectory of this work that is being done. Congratulations with that. While you were speaking tonight, I thought, oh, wonderful. He's one of those people who can demystify difficult concepts without oversimplifying them. And that's a real, real gift. And you know, I'm now going to give you a huge compliment. I am a huge fan of the physicist Richard Feynman, who was an excellent, excellent teacher. I don't know much about physics, but I love teaching and I study teaching. And it's absolutely brilliant to watch the old videos of him teaching. And one of the things that he used to say, if you can't explain a concept so that freshmen understand it, it means you don't understand it. And I've often thought about this, that sometimes we think we will impress people by complicating stuff. Actually, what we need to be able to do is simplify the difficulty of what we struggle with, but in a way that we don't take away the complexity. And somebody said what Richard Feynman could do so well was to get to the heart of the problem, knocking out the non-essentials. And that is also what I've experienced tonight. So congratulations with the work that you've done up to now, the work that you are envisaging, and thank you for sharing professing with tonight. And I'm really, really looking forward to read your full paper after your presentation tonight. So please come and celebrate with us. There's some refreshments in the foyer there. All of the best.